There is a man who lives 3 houses down from me named Arthur. We are roughly the same age, both of us navigating our early 80s in the dry heat of Scottsdale, Arizona. For the better part of a decade, Arthur was the kind of neighbor you set your watch by. He maintained his yard with a quiet, mechanical precision. Every morning at 7, you could hear the sound of his clippers trimming the hedges, the sweep of his broom clearing the dust off his driveway. He walked with his shoulders pulled back. He looked like a man who was firmly in control of the machinery of his life. But over the last year, I have watched Arthur slowly disappear into himself. The hedges are overgrown. The dust is piling up against his garage door. When I saw him by the fence last Tuesday, he looked fragile. His skin had a gray, paper-thin quality to it. His eyes were deeply sunken, carrying dark, heavy bags underneath them. He looked like an engine that had been running without oil for 1,000 miles. I asked him if he was doing all right. He leaned against the wooden fence, exhaled a long, shaky breath, and told me he was just tired. He said he had not slept a full night in over 2 years. He told me he was getting up 4, sometimes 5 times a night to go to the bathroom. He said it with a tone of absolute resignation, the way a man talks about a roof that is leaking but costs too much to fix. He blamed his age. He blamed his prostate. He told me that his bladder was just shrinking, that the valves were giving out, and that this was simply the toll the road takes on an 80-year-old chassis. He had accepted exhaustion as a mandatory condition of his remaining years. He had surrendered his independence to a mechanical failure he did not understand. I stood there looking at him, and I felt a deep, uncomfortable ache in my chest. I did not feel pity. I felt recognition. Because looking at Arthur was exactly like looking into a mirror from 3 years ago. I knew exactly what that gray skin felt like. I knew the heavy, suffocating brain fog that makes a simple conversation feel like lifting a bag of wet concrete. 3 years ago, I was the man standing by the fence, blaming my prostate, blaming my age, and letting the lack of sleep slowly dismantle my life. For a long time, my nights were a series of frustrating, broken segments. I would go through my evening routine, lock the doors, turn down the thermostat, and get into bed feeling a deep physical exhaustion in my bones. I would drift off to sleep. But predictably, inevitably, I would wake up at 1 in the morning. My eyes would snap open in the dark. My mouth would feel like it was stuffed with dry cotton, my throat parched and scratching, and below that the sharp, undeniable pressure in my bladder forcing me to throw off the covers. I would make the slow walk down the dark hallway to the bathroom, use the toilet, rinse my dry mouth with a handful of water from the sink, and walk back to bed. I would lie there staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the air conditioning, waiting for my brain to power down again. I would finally fall asleep, only to have the exact same cycle repeat at 3 in the morning, and again at 5. By the time the sun came up and the neighborhood started moving, I was completely depleted. I felt like a battery that would not hold a charge. The exhaustion bled into every corner of my existence. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, the son of a factory worker. My father taught me that a man works through his fatigue, but this was not the fatigue of honest labor. This was a systemic breakdown. I stopped going for my morning walks because my legs felt unsteady. I stopped working on the old engine parts in my garage because I did not trust my hands to hold the wrenches securely. I would sit in my armchair after lunch and simply stare at the wall, too tired to read, too tired to call my children, too tired to live. Like Arthur, I told myself the comfortable lie. I told myself it was my plumbing. I assumed my prostate was swelling, pressing against the pipes, restricting the flow and shrinking the capacity of the tank. It is what happens to older men. It is the story we are all told. So I did what any logical man would do to fix a leaking system. I tried to shut off the water supply. I began to severely restrict my fluids. I stopped drinking anything after dinner. When I still woke up 3 times a night, I moved the deadline back to 4 in the afternoon. Living in Arizona, dehydrating yourself deliberately is a miserable, dangerous game. The afternoon heat pulls the moisture right out of your skin. I would sit at the kitchen table, eating my dinner, staring at the faucet, feeling a deep, primal thirst but refusing to drink a single drop. I was forcing my engine to run completely dry, convinced that if I put nothing into the tank, nothing would need to be emptied in the middle of the night. It was a spectacular failure. I would go to bed parched, and at 2 in the morning the urge would strike just the same. I would walk to the bathroom utterly baffled. I had not consumed water in 8 hours. Where was this liquid coming from? How was my body manufacturing urine out of thin air while I was desperately dehydrated? I felt betrayed by my own biology. I finally gave in and went to the doctor. I sat on the crinkling paper of the examination table and told him my prostate was failing. He ran the tests. He did the exams, and when he came back into the room, he looked at his clipboard and told me my prostate was perfectly fine. It was normal for my age. It was not pressing on anything. My bladder capacity was normal. I asked him why I was waking up 4 times a night to empty a bladder that I was actively trying to keep empty. He shrugged. He told me it was called nocturia. He said it was common in older adults. He offered me a prescription medication to try and calm the bladder nerves, a pill with a list of side effects longer than my arm, including dizziness and a heightened risk of falling. I declined the prescription. I walked out of that office feeling completely abandoned. The medical industry had put a label on my problem, shrugged its shoulders, and told me to learn to live with the leak. The real answer, the mechanical truth that actually gave me my life back, did not come from a clinic. It came a few months later when my son Daniel came down from Denver to visit me. Daniel is a physical therapist. He has spent his entire career looking at the human body not as a collection of isolated symptoms, but as an interconnected machine of pulleys, levers, pressures, and pumps. We were sitting in my living room on a Saturday afternoon watching a baseball game on the television. I was exhausted as usual. I leaned back in my armchair, closed my eyes during a commercial break, and drifted off to sleep. I do not know how long I was out, but I woke up abruptly, gasping slightly, my mouth feeling like sandpaper. Daniel was not watching the television. He was sitting on the sofa watching me. He had muted the game. He asked me how long I had been breathing like that. I asked him what he meant. I told him I was just taking a nap. He shook his head. He told me that for the last 20 minutes my mouth had been hanging wide open. He said I was pulling air in through my throat with a heavy, ragged sound, struggling against my own airway. I brushed it off. I told him everyone snores a little bit when they get old. I told him the real problem was my bladder and that the lack of sleep was making me nap in the chair. Daniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He told me I had the equation completely backward. He told me my bladder was not waking me up so that I could pee. My breathing was waking me up, and my body was using the bladder as the excuse. I told him he was out of his mind. I told him the urge to use the bathroom was real. The volume of liquid was real. I was not imagining the water. Daniel did not argue. He just started explaining the plumbing. He used the language of mechanics, the only language that has ever made sense to me. He told me to think about my chest cavity like a sealed vacuum chamber. The heart and the lungs sit inside that chamber. When you breathe normally through your nose, the air is filtered, warmed, and pressurized perfectly. The nose acts as the proper intake valve for the engine. It creates a smooth, controlled resistance that allows the diaphragm to pull the air deeply into the lower lungs. But when you open your mouth to breathe while you are sleeping, everything changes. The mouth is not an intake valve. It is a massive unfiltered leak in the vacuum system. Daniel explained that when your jaw drops open and your tongue falls back, your airway partially collapses. It becomes a narrow, floppy straw. Because the airway is restricted, your lungs have to work twice as hard to pull the air in. You have to create a massive amount of negative pressure in your chest cavity just to suck the oxygen past the obstruction. It is like trying to draw thick oil through a tiny hose. You have to pull with tremendous force. That massive negative pressure in the chest does not just affect the lungs. It pulls on everything inside the chamber. And the most vulnerable thing in that chamber is your heart. Daniel told me that every time I took a ragged, struggling breath through my open mouth, the vacuum in my chest was physically stretching the walls of my heart. The right atrium, the chamber of the heart that receives blood returning from the body, was being pulled and distended by the negative pressure. This is where the mechanics turn into chemistry. The heart is not a stupid pump. It has built-in sensors. When the walls of the right atrium get stretched, the heart assumes it is because there is too much fluid volume in the system. It assumes the pipes are flooded, so the heart does exactly what it was designed to do in a flood. It sends an emergency signal to the release valves. It secretes a powerful hormone called atrial natriuretic peptide, or ANP. Daniel looked at me to make sure I was following. He told me that ANP is a chemical messenger whose sole purpose is to travel straight to the kidneys and scream at them to dump water. It tells the kidneys to pull liquid out of the bloodstream and fill the bladder as fast as possible to relieve the pressure on the heart. I sat in my armchair, completely stunned. The silence in the living room was heavy. I had spent 2 years blaming my prostate. I had spent 2 years dehydrating myself, making my throat bleed, torturing my kidneys by refusing to give them water during the day. And all along, my kidneys were working perfectly. My bladder was working perfectly. My prostate was fine. The problem was a false alarm. Every time I fell asleep and my mouth fell open, I was creating a vacuum leak. The vacuum was stretching my heart. My heart was panicking and ordering the kidneys to manufacture urine out of whatever fluid they could scrape together from my tissues. I was waking up at 2 in the morning with a full bladder because my heart was desperately trying to drain a flood that did not actually exist. I was not waking up because I had to pee. I had to pee because my mouth was open. I asked Daniel how to fix it. I expected him to tell me I needed a massive, expensive machine to force air down my throat. One of those masks that makes you look like a fighter pilot. I know men who use those machines. They complain about the noise, they complain about the straps, and half the time they take them off in the middle of the night anyway. But Daniel did not suggest a machine. He suggested a mechanical intervention so simple, so absurdly basic that I almost laughed at him. He told me I needed to seal the leak. He told me I needed to tape my mouth shut. I stared at him. I told him I was 80 years old, not a hostage. I told him putting tape over my mouth sounded dangerous, suffocating, and ridiculous. Daniel did not laugh. He explained that we are biologically designed to be obligate nasal breathers. The mouth is meant for eating and talking, not for breathing during unconsciousness. He told me that if I could force my body to breathe through my nose for the entire night, the airway would not collapse. The negative pressure would disappear. The heart would not stretch. The ANP hormone would never be released. The false alarm would stop ringing. He went to my medicine cabinet in the bathroom and brought back a roll of porous, hypoallergenic surgical tape, the kind they use to hold gauze over a small cut. It was not duct tape. It was not heavy masking tape. It was incredibly light and breathable. He showed me how to use it. He did not tell me to seal my lips from corner to corner like a bank robber. He told me to tear off a tiny piece, no larger than a postage stamp. He told me to place it vertically, right in the center of my lips, just enough to hold them gently together. If I needed to cough, or if I panicked, I could open my mouth easily and the tape would break free. It was not a gag. It was a gentle mechanical reminder to the jaw to stay closed. I did not believe it would work. It sounded like the kind of fake remedy you read about in the back pages of a cheap magazine. But I thought about the brain fog. I thought about the exhaustion. I thought about my father, ignoring his squeaky wheels until the wagon broke down completely. I decided I had nothing to lose but another terrible night of sleep. That evening I went through my normal inventory. I locked the doors, turned off the lamps, and adjusted the thermostat. I went into the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. I took the roll of surgical tape, tore off a small square piece, and pressed it vertically across the center of my lips. It felt strange. It felt restrictive. I breathed in deeply through my nose, feeling the cool air hit the back of my throat. I got into bed and turned off the light. The first hour was difficult. My brain kept trying to open my mouth out of pure habit, and the tape provided just enough resistance to stop it. I focused on the air moving through my nasal passages. I focused on the quiet hum of the air conditioning. Eventually, the exhaustion took over and I drifted off. When I opened my eyes again, the room was not dark. I saw the faint gray light of dawn bleeding through the edges of the blinds. I heard a bird outside my window. I lay perfectly still. I did not feel the sharp, urgent pressure in my lower abdomen. My mouth was not dry. The tape was still resting gently on my lips. I reached over and pulled it off, staring at it in the dim light. I looked at the digital clock on the nightstand. It was 6:30 in the morning. I'd slept for 7.5 hours, uninterrupted. No dark walks down the hallway. No frantic cycles of waking and staring at the ceiling. The false alarm had been silenced. When I stood up and walked to the kitchen, the difference in my physical body was profound. It was not a subtle change. It was a revelation. My legs held my weight firmly. The heavy, dragging fog behind my eyes was gone. My mind felt sharp, clear, and quiet. I felt like an engine that had finally been given a full supply of rich oxygen and clean fuel. I made my coffee and stood by the kitchen window looking out at the Arizona morning. I realized then how much of my life I had been willing to forfeit simply because I misunderstood the mechanics of my own body. I had accepted the lie that age meant exhaustion. I had accepted the lie that my internal plumbing was broken, and all it took to fix the entire system was a tiny piece of paper tape to close a vacuum leak. I have not gone to sleep without that piece of tape in 3 years. It is as non-negotiable as locking the front door. Every night the tape goes on. Every night the engine is forced to breathe the way it was designed to breathe. Every night the heart stays calm, the kidneys stay quiet, and the body actually repairs itself. Once I fixed the mechanics, I started drinking water again. I drink plenty of water with my dinner now. I hydrate properly, the way a man living in the desert must. And it does not matter, because without the false alarm from the heart, the kidneys simply hold the water in the system where it belongs, keeping the tissues hydrated until morning. There is a tragic lack of curiosity in the way we treat the aging body. We are too quick to accept deterioration as fate. We are too quick to assume that an 80-year-old man waking up 5 times a night is just experiencing the inevitable decline of his prostate. We isolate the symptoms, we look at the bathroom trips, and we blame the bladder. We never stop to look at the engine intake. We never stop to measure the pressure in the chest. If your car's engine is sputtering and stalling, a good mechanic does not just replace the exhaust pipe. He looks at the intake valves. He looks for a vacuum leak. He understands that a problem at the end of the line is almost always caused by a failure at the beginning of the system. Your body is no different. I think about Arthur, my neighbor, standing by the fence with his gray skin and his heavy eyes. I think about the millions of older men and women who are currently sitting in armchairs, too tired to play with their grandchildren, too tired to maintain their homes, believing that their lives are shrinking because their bodies are failing. They are not failing. They are just operating under the wrong mechanical conditions. When you do not sleep, you do not heal. The chronic sleep interruption caused by mouth breathing does more than just make you tired. It keeps your body in a constant state of low-grade panic. It drives your resting blood pressure up. It floods your system with stress hormones. It accelerates the rust on your joints and the plaque in your arteries. It robs you of your balance, which is the only thing keeping you from a catastrophic fall. Sleep is not a luxury. It is the foundation of your independence. I think of Margaret, my wife, who passed away in 2019. She struggled with her sleep in her final years. She would wake up constantly, wandering the house, her mouth dry, her energy completely spent by noon. We bought softer pillows. We bought heavier curtains. We did not know about the vacuum leak. We did not know that a piece of tape might have given her back the deep restorative rest that could have kept her strong. I carry that memory with me. I cannot change the past, but I can refuse to let the same ignorance dismantle my present. When you reach this age, you stop looking for miracles. You stop reading the magazines that promise you a second youth. You start looking for leverage. You look for the small mechanical truths that allow you to maintain your dignity and your autonomy. Independence is not a state of mind. It is the physical ability to carry your own groceries into the house. It is the ability to drive your own truck. It is the confidence to walk down your own hallway without needing to run your hand along the wall for balance. And that physical ability is manufactured in the dark, during those unbroken hours of deep, quiet sleep. This I learned too late for me in some respects, but you still have time. The exhaustion you're feeling is not a life sentence. The plumbing is likely much stronger than you think. Do not accept the comfortable lie that your body is just breaking down. Look for the leak. Tonight, before you go to sleep, pay attention to how you are breathing. If you are waking up with a dry mouth, if you are getting out of bed 3 times a night, do not blame the water you drank at dinner. Go to your medicine cabinet, get a roll of surgical tape, tear off a piece the size of a postage stamp and put it over the center of your lips. Force the intake valve to work the way it was designed. Silence the false alarm. Protect your heart. Give your kidneys the night off. What you ignore today can severely limit you tomorrow. But the mechanics you fix today can give you back your days, your energy, and your life. Do the work. Tape the leak. Reclaim your rest. I'll see you next time.